We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! The video for today will be the part 5 of What If Naruto Traveled to the World of Harry Potter. The trust of a child is a fragile thing. Naruto becomes disenchanted with Konoha and the Sandaime Hokage when he stumbles upon the truth of who and what he is on his 8th birthday. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 17, Oathbound. Tuesday, October 2, 2001, morning. Konoha no Sato, Hai no Kuni. Hiruzen studied Namikaze Takashi as the 21-year-old man stepped into his office on the heels of Umbu Nico before his eyes slid to the often hyperactive blonde that was practically glued to the man's side. Every single report he'd received from the Umbu guards assigned to shadow the Namikaze family consistently stated that all 5 members of the small family were a tight-knit group but that the 3 youngest Namikaze males were exceptionally close. It was also said that Takashi, who was clearly the head of the family despite him being slightly younger than Arata, was highly protective of both children. The green-eyed brunette had actually been called a mother bear with a tongue sharper than any blade on more than one occasion when the man had verbally lambasted anyone foolish enough to insult the bewhiskered blonde within range of the volatile man. Those that dared to sneer at the blonde were treated to a mere glare that could easily topple mountains if the glare could be given physical form. The rest of the time the man was an affable individual that went out of his way to avoid conflicts and doted on his son and younger cousin. He was also a rather perplexing puzzle that Hiruzen was having difficulty deciphering. That the man didn't really trust him enough to share anything beyond the basics didn't help Hiruzen get the answers he needed. Hiruzen set aside his ponderings on the mystery that was Namikaze Takashi as the man in question stopped in front of his desk and greeted him, "Ohayou, Hokage-sama." "Good morning, Takashi-san, Naruto-kun," Hiruzen replied in kind. "I trust that you both know why you are here." "Hi, Nico-chan told us that you wanted to see us, Databeo," Naruto answered as he rocked on his feet and grinned at him. "I presume that you called us here to discuss your decision on whether or not the results of our recent assessments were adequate enough to merit our induction into the ranks of Konoha's Shinobi force," Takashi added after letting out a soft snort in response to Naruto's answer. "Correct," Hiruzen agreed with a nod before he turned to address the younger boy. "Naruto, your test results showed a marked improvement across the board when compared to the test scores from your first 2 years at the academy. I see no reason to send you back to the academy when you already know the material, providing that you can demonstrate sufficient control over the 3 basic academy jutsu for me right now." Naruto's sapphire eyes lit up with excitement as he immediately traded places with a chair on the other side of the room before he cheekily switched back using Takashi, causing the young man to let out a startled squawk. The kid then used a henge to make himself appear as Takashi's double, completely accurate right down to the slightly annoyed scowl that the green-eyed man was wearing as he crossed the room to return to his earlier position. The blonde then dropped the henge and bit his lip as his earlier excitement was replaced with a measure of worry. "Do I have to do the regular bunshin, Gigi?" Naruto asked hesitantly after briefly glancing up at his cousin. "The bunshin is a graduation requirement," Hiruzen pointed out even as he felt his heart swell in response to the irreverent form of address the boy used since it let him know that Naruto still cared for him despite how angry he had been with him for withholding information from him. "Naruto-kun has the same issues with the academy-level bunshin that I do, Hokage-sama," Takashi didn't hesitate to explain when Naruto's shoulders slumped in resignation. Understanding filled the Sandaime as he considered a couple of potential ways to get around the bunshin requirement before he recalled what Takashi had told him the day the family arrived in the village about Naruto being able to perform the Kage bunshin. Nodding to himself, Hiruzen suggested, "Why don't you show me what happens when you do the bunshin no jutsu so that I can note that you attempted the jutsu before you show me any alternate bunshin forms you are capable of creating?" Naruto's entire demeanor flipped around instantly and the tension in Takashi's shoulders eased with the offered compromise and Hiruzen mentally patted himself on the back for avoiding a potential outburst from the overprotective young man. He then gave his full attention to Naruto as the blonde formed the hand seals to create a pair of sickly-looking clones that were pooled on the floor. The bewhiskered blonde cringed over the deplorable state of the illusion clones before he glanced in Hiruzen's direction as if expecting to get yelled at for the failure. "Yes, I recall Takashi-san's regular bunshin having a similar appearance the other day. Why don't you go ahead and dispel those and demonstrate an alternate variation of the bunshin that you've learned? Naruto sighed in relief before he quickly dispelled the 2 dying clones and created 10 Kage bunshin to take their place. Curious to see how durable the clones were, Hiruzen climbed to his feet and made his way around the desk to test the clones. He flicked a few noses, poked a few bellies, swept another off its feet, and jabbed the final one with the handle of his calligraphy brush. He was quite pleased to note that the ones he poked and flicked remained while the last 2 were dispelled. Well done, Naruto-kun. The clones were also far sturdier than I expected them to be for someone your age. Thanks, Gigi. Hiruzen made his way back to his seat, opened the top drawer of his desk, and pulled out a brand new Hitai 8 and a Shinobi registration packet that he set on the edge of his desk for Naruto to collect. Congratulations, Genin. You've passed your graduation exam and earned your Hitai 8. You have until noon this Friday to complete your Shinobi registration packet. If you do not have a recent photograph, you will need to see the photographer upstairs to have your picture taken before you turn in your packet. Yada. Good job, Squirt, Takashi murmured as he smiled at Naruto and ruffled his hair, and though he appeared to be happy for Naruto, Hiruzen could see the pain and resignation in the man's green eyes, and he knew that Takashi hated the fact that the blonde had just become a shinobi. Naruto appeared to be completely oblivious to his cousin's unhappy demeanor as the blonde tackled the man around the waist and hugged him tightly before he beamed up at him, when Takashi readily hugged him in return. I hate to interrupt your celebration, but I do need to wrap things up here as I have work to do, Hiruzen requested after allowing Naruto to bask in his cousin's affection for a few minutes. Arigato. After carefully reviewing the results of your physical evaluation, Takashi-san, I have decided to approve your application to join the shinobi force. The Sandaime then dug into the top drawer of his desk again to grab another Hitai 8 registration packet, and a storage scroll that he set on the desk and slid in the direction of the man. Allow me to be the first one to welcome you into the ranks of Konoha's shinobi force, Chunin. The storage scroll I just gave you holds your new flak jacket, a standard shinobi field kit, and 2 vouchers each good for 3 sets of the standard shinobi uniform, one for you and one for Naruto, that you can redeem at any of the armories within Konoha. It is not mandatory that you wear the standard uniform except on certain occasions, a list of which has been provided for you in the rule book that can be found in your field kit. If you wish to obtain additional uniforms or need to replace a damaged uniform, you will need to purchase them yourself, as uniform vouchers are only issued once every 5 years on the anniversary of your induction into the force. I have taken the liberty of scheduling you to take an academic assessment test tomorrow at the academy. You will need to be in room 283 by 8 o'clock. You will also have until noon this Friday to complete your shinobi registration packet and provide an up-to-date photo. The photographer upstairs is available from 8 to 4 every day, and since this is a slow time of year for him, you will not need to worry about making an appointment ahead of time. The 2 of you will then need to return to my office at 1 o'clock sharp this Friday to turn in your registration forms and swear your oaths before I can assign you to a team. Hi, Hokage-sama, Takashi murmured in a flat tone at the same time as Naruto excitedly replied, Hi, Hokage Gigi. Hiruzen dismissed the pair at that point and tracked them with his eyes as they left the room, the blonde bouncing excitedly as he tried to convince his cousin to take him to Ichiraku's to celebrate, while the raven-haired man wearily placed one foot in front of the other. Watching the young man, Hiruzen had the impression that he was watching a condemned man walk to his death instead of a newly inducted shinobi leaving his superior's office. When Takashi glanced back to meet his gaze, Hiruzen found himself looking into frozen emerald eyes filled with barely suppressed fury coupled with hopeless resignation. As the door to his office swung shut and blocked the sight Takashi's green gaze, Hiruzen wondered if he'd just made a mistake. A glance down at the evaluation summary sitting in the middle of his desk and knew that he'd really had no choice. Not if he wanted to keep the 2 Jinchuriki and the Namikaze family in Konoha. Friday, October 5, 2001, afternoon. Konohagakure no Sato, Hai no Kuni. Contrary to the Sandaime Hokage's assumption that he was entirely clueless, Naruto was very much aware of his cousin's conflicted feelings. Over the past 2+ years, Naruto had learned to accurately gauge Harry's moods with uncanny accuracy, whether or not his green-eyed cousin tried to downplay or hide his emotions. As such, he'd known that Harry had been growing steadily tenser from the moment they stepped through the portal, and that each step closer to Konoha had shortened the fuse on Harry's explosive temper. The ambush they'd been caught up in so close to their destination hadn't helped matters, though it had allowed the man to burn off some of his frustration. Their treatment upon arriving in Konoha, which while not exactly rough had been enough out of the norm, when compared to how most of the other new arrivals were treated, had ignited the fuse. The Sandaime's attempt to split them up without so much as a by your leave had then triggered a spectacular explosion that had been building for weeks. Naruto suspected that it had been ages since someone had chewed out the old man Hokage so thoroughly, and Naruto had felt a rush of affection for his cousin that day as Harry verbally lit into the man on Naruto's behalf. The remainder of the first week been relatively uneventful and calm, bar the day Harry had had his skills tested. Naruto only wished his Otoko had not chased him off just when things were getting interesting. He would have loved to have watched the 2-hour-long ninjutsu match that Harry had fought against one of the Jounin. Naruto was certain that his cousin had been awesome. Proof of that had come when Harry had been given the rank of Chunin the day the Hokage had given them their Hitaiate. Naruto had been tickled pink. His cousin was so awesome he'd skipped right over Genin and gone straight to Chunin. Naruto had wanted to crow his cousin's accomplishments to the world but had refrained from doing so because he'd sensed Harry's unhappiness from the moment Sarutobi had passed Naruto a Hitaiate. Naruto knew that his cousin was proud of him for passing his assessment tests and for acing the surprise graduation exam with no warning, but he also knew that his cousin was not pleased that Naruto had essentially become a child soldier at age 11. What made the blonde Jinchuriki love his cousin even more was the fact that Harry had done his very best to repress his dissatisfaction and just be happy for Naruto's sake. If not for the fact that Naruto was so in tune with Harry's moods, something Naruto was half convinced had to do with the fact that they both had half of the Kyuubi inside of them along with Harry's magic, he would have been fooled by Harry's act. All of that ran through Naruto's mind in the blink of an eye as he stepped through the door leading into the Hokage's office on Harry's heels once more. Naruto stepped up beside his cousin as the green-eyed man slowed to a stop just in front of the Hokage's desk. His cousin then bowed respectfully to the Sandaime before taking 2 steps forward to pass the man both of their Shinobi registration packets. A heartbeat later, Harry was once again standing silently beside him. Naruto's eyes cut to his cousin as he again took in the crisp navy blue Shinobi uniform that Harry had put on just before they'd left the wagons. The green flak jacket that denoted his rank as a Chunin peeked out from under the black dragon hide cloak that Harry had rarely taken off since they'd set foot in the elemental nations. His pants were tucked into the dragon hide boots that he'd refused to give up. Harry stubbornly refused to even consider wearing the standard Shinobi sandals. And his Hitaiate had been secured around the middle of his left thigh after he'd claimed that the metal plate irritated the faint scar on his forehead. By comparison, Naruto wore the standard navy blue pants and Shinobi sandals, a dark orange t-shirt over a mesh armor undershirt, a sturdy but lightweight navy blue jacket, that was currently unzipped, and his Hitaiate proudly tied around his forehead. He also had a shuriken holder strapped to his right thigh and a utility pouch clipped to the back of his pants, unlike Harry who carried his shuriken, kunai, and other supplies in specially designed hand-sewn pockets secreted about his cloak. Naruto planned to ask his cousin if he'd help him add similar pockets to his new jacket so that he could carry extra kunai and supplies that would be easily overlooked on casual inspection. Naruto's attention was drawn back to the Hokage when the man finished skimming through the registration forms and glanced up to address them. Everything appears to be in order. You can expect your Shinobi identification cards to be ready in 5 to 7 days and you can pick them up from my secretary. You will be required to keep your ID cards on you at all times once you receive them, and in the event that your card is lost, stolen, or damaged, you are to report it immediately to your immediate supervisor so that the missing or damaged card can be deactivated and a new card issued. Wakarimasu, Harry murmured while Naruto just waited for the old man to get to the important stuff, like telling him who his teammates were. That brings us to the next item on the agenda, your Shinobi oaths. Who will give their oath first? I will, Gigi, Naruto stated when he felt Harry tense minutely beside him as the Hokage rose from his seat and walked around the desk to stand before the pair of them. Very well, Naruto-kun. Please repeat after me. I state your full name, do hereby pledge my life and loyalty to Konoha no Sato. I, Namikaze Naruto, do hereby pledge my life and loyalty to Konoha no Sato. As a loyal shinobi of the leaf. State your name again. Swear to uphold the laws of Konoha no Sato and obey my Hokage for so long as I wear the leaf in the service of Konoha no Sato. As a loyal shinobi of the leaf, I, Namikaze Naruto, swear to uphold the laws of Konoha no Sato and obey my Hokage for so long as I wear the leaf in the service of Konoha no Sato. Naruto obediently parroted as he tried not to turn to stare at his cousin in concern when he felt the man twitch slightly. Genin Namikaze, in my capacity as the Sandaime Hokage, I, Sarutobi Hiruzen, do hereby accept your oath of loyalty and obedience in the name of Konoha no Sato and officially welcome you as a true shinobi of the leaf. The Hokage intoned as he reached out with his right hand to touch Naruto's left temple. The old man then channeled the smallest thread of chakra that sent a small jolt through Naruto's head before it shifted to his Hitai-8 in order to activate the hidden seals in the metal plate that would announce his status as a sworn shinobi to the rest of the shinobi. A precautionary measure that had been implanted 1 year after his disappearance in order to prevent spies from infiltrating the ranks as easily as they had before due to an inactive Hitai-8 sticking out like a sore thumb amongst a sea of activated forehead protectors. I live to serve, Hokage-sama, Naruto replied as his father's ghost had instructed him earlier that morning. I, Namikaze Takashi, do hereby pledge my life and loyalty to Konoha no Sato, Harry stated without prompting the moment that the Hokage turned to face the dark-haired man and Naruto shivered slightly as he felt his cousin's magic rise in response to his words, a feeling he only recognized due to the fact that he'd been living with the older man for 2 years. As a loyal shinobi of the leaf, I, Namikaze Takashi, swear to uphold the reasonable laws of Konoha no Sato and obey my Hokage so long as his or her orders are for the betterment of Konoha no Sato and will not cause undue harm, whether intentional or not, to the Namikaze family for so long as I draw breath while wearing the leaf in the service of Konoha no Sato. Chunin Namikaze, in my capacity as the Sandaime Hokage, I, Sarutobi Hiruzen, do hereby accept your oath of loyalty and obedience in the name of Konoha no Sato and officially welcome you as a true shinobi of the leaf, the Hokage declared after a slight hesitation, a small frown marring his brow in response to Harry altering the words of the oath, as he reached out with his right hand to touch Harry's left temple in order to activate Harry's Hitai-8. So mote it be, Harry incanted in English as he fisted his right hand, tapped his fist against his heart while he shifted his left arm across the small of his back, snapped his heels together, and straightened his shoulders. Naruto watched with wide eyes as an unseen wind fueled by Harry's magic suddenly whipped around him and tugged at his hair and cloak in response to his words before disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Harry's emerald eyes burned brightly, the edges of his irises tinted gold, as he finished with, I am yours to command, Hokage-sama. And can you tell me why you felt it necessary to alter the wording of the shinobi's traditional oath, Takashi? The original oath left far too much room for my oath to be abused, Hokage-sama, Harry replied as he dropped his arms and shoved his hands in his pockets. I do not swear oaths lightly, Hokage-sama, for my word is far more binding than you could possibly imagine and the consequences that I will suffer should I break an oath that I have sworn would be crippling if they didn't outright kill me. Congratulations, Hokage-sama, you now hold the leash to a living weapon. Keishinai. Naruto worriedly murmured as he reached out to grab Harry's sleeve. Everything will be fine, Naruto. The changes that Minato helped me make to the oath will allow me enough wiggle room to breathe and that is all that matters. Harry replied gently as he glanced down to offer Naruto a small smile before pulling one hand free of his pockets so that he could comb his fingers through Naruto's hair. Naruto sighed softly as he leaned into the comforting touch and allowed himself to relax. He trusted Harry to be honest with him and if Harry said things would be fine then they would be fine. Can you please explain to me what you mean by that? The Hokage inquired as he returned to his seat. My Kekkei Genkai allows me to make binding oaths that are virtually unbreakable and that is all that I am going to say on the matter. Please do not ask me for any more information regarding my Kekkei Genkai as I do not trust you enough to risk my family's health and safety by handing you information that could see my family dead or worse. I see, the Sandaime murmured in a tone that Naruto knew meant the old man would drop the subject for now but that he would be addressing it again at some point in the future. The Hokage then cleared his throat before he addressed Naruto in a solemn voice that made his heart clench in fear as the man stated, Naruto, I'm afraid that I made a slight miscalculation when I attempted to place you on a team. Due to the timing of your graduation, there is a distinct lack of unassigned genin with which to form a new team. After giving the matter a great deal of consideration, I decided that I would go ahead and assign you to a jounin instructor anyway. I will assign an additional pair of genin to your team in a couple of months from amongst the winter graduates. That's fine, Gigi, Naruto breathed in sheer relief the moment the Hokage finished speaking. His fear of his Hitai-8 being taken from him the moment the old man had said he had made a mistake had been unfounded. I'm glad you approve, the Hokage dryly countered, though Naruto knew the old man was amused because the little wrinkles around his eyes were slightly more pronounced from the man's efforts not to grin. The Sandaime then grew serious once more as he turned his attention back to Harry. I experienced a similar difficulty when I tried to choose your teammates, Takashi-san, though it wasn't a lack of choices that was the problem. Your current skill levels are just far too imbalanced for me to ensure that you are placed with individuals whose skills and abilities will complement your strengths and compensate for your weaknesses. With that in mind, I have chosen instead to apprentice you to a jounin who can devote his time and attention to helping you get the most out of your training. In 18 months' time, we can reevaluate your skill levels to determine whether or not you are ready to be placed in a chunin cell. That should also give you plenty of time to fill in the holes in your education, settle into your place here in the village, and become acquainted with your fellow shinobi. Wakarimasu, Hokage-sama, Harry murmured indifferently while Naruto scowled slightly as he felt his cousin had just been given the wrong end of the kunai and basically told that he wasn't good enough to be placed on a team. Do either of you have any questions? No. Then let us introduce you to the two gentlemen that will be responsible for your continued growth and education as shinobi of Konoha, as well as your immediate supervisors and commanding officers for the foreseeable future, the Hokage declared as he signaled to the two jounin that must have been waiting just outside of the office, both men slipping in through the window instead of heading around to the door. Yo! The masked jounin with silver hair that had been part of the group testing Harry's skill at the end of the previous month offered with what Naruto thought might be a smile based on the way the man's one visible eye crinkled up. Konnichiwa, the other jounin greeted with a smile as Naruto studied the unfamiliar man with open curiosity. The man had medium brown hair and dark eyes, wore the standard shinobi uniform with green flak jacket, and his Hitaite was attached to a metal faceplate type armor that was similar to what the Sandaime Hokage used to wear. I believe that you both know Hitachi Kakashi, who has agreed to accept Naruto as his student, the Hokage announced a moment later as he gestured to the masked jounin who gave the cousins a two-fingered salute. And with him is Jounin Yamato, who has agreed to mentor Takashi for the next 18 months. Gentlemen, please meet your new students, Namikaze Takashi and Namikaze Naruto. Naruto repressed the smirk he felt fighting to make itself known on his face. He knew exactly who Kakashi was thanks to all of the stories his father had told him over the past 2 years. Adopting an aggrieved air, Naruto complained, "Ah man, Gigi, did you have to saddle me with a boring stick in the mud that does everything by the book, lacks a sense of humor, and has no appreciation for the fine art of pranking, Databeo? I bet he hates ramen too." The look of disbelief on Kakashi's masked face was priceless, despite the fact that it was hard to see, and Naruto could barely contain the giggles that were threatening to slip out. The fact that the Hokage was hiding his amusement beneath the shadows of his hat and Yamato was openly chuckling didn't help. What really made the small prank worthwhile though was the silent laughter shaking Harry's shoulders as Naruto knew that Harry knew that Naruto was aware that Kakashi had changed after the death of one of his teammates. Minato had told them that story more than once. I'm thinking laps, 10 of them, yes, that sounds about right, 10 laps on the top of the village wall, Kakashi deadpanned before he gave Naruto a humorless eye smile. See, no sense of humor, Databeo. Naruto wailed dramatically before he lost the fight against his amusement and burst into a flurry of giggles. I blame you for all of the headaches I just know are in my future, Hokage-sama. Kakashi huffed with suppressed amusement as he crossed his arms and pretended to glare at Naruto. Alright, Gaki, meet me at training ground 3 in 10 minutes so that I can evaluate your current skills. Hi, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto sighed as he reluctantly moved away from his cousin and headed towards the door. Go on, Squirt, you can complain to me later tonight about just how unappreciative your sensei is when it comes to your uncanny ability to turn any situation into a stage for your next prank. You're the best Otoko ever, Keishi and I. Naruto declared as he turned back to throw his arms around Harry's waist and hugged him tight before he dashed out the door in order to not get in trouble for being late. Friday, October 5, 2001, afternoon. Konoha no Sato, Hai no Kuni. Yamato, aka Umbu Guard Panda, aka Mokutan no Tenzu, discreetly observed his apprentice as Kakashi slipped back out through the window and the Jinchuriki of the Kyubi. One Namikaze Naruto, and wasn't that just a sharp kick in the nads? The Yondaime had sealed the most powerful bijou into his own son and the entire village had spat on Minato's living legacy, hugged his cousin before darting out the door. The man had dressed in a fresh-from-the-shelf shinobi uniform, a green flak jacket, a long black trench coat made from what almost looked like snakeskin, and sturdy black boots made from the same material as the coat. Strapped to his back, arms, and hips, the man wore no less than 7 blades, a katana on his left hip, a broadsword on his right hip, a tanto at the small of his back, twin wakizashi blades crosswise across his back, and a pair of daggers strapped to his forearms. Lastly, the man wore his hatayade around the middle of his left thigh, an odd place to wear the symbol of his status as a shinobi. Like Kakashi, Yamato had been one of the watchers assigned to shadow and observe the small family that had popped up from out of nowhere and claimed to be related to the Sandaime Hokage. Unlike Kakashi, Yamato had not been very close to Namake's Minato and therefore had no emotional baggage to distract him from his job beyond his need to ensure that the small family was not a threat to the village. Armed with what little information the Hokage and a handful of others had gathered during that first meeting with the family, Yamato had determined that the black-haired, green-eyed man potentially posed the greatest threat. That was an assessment that all of the Umbu guards assigned to watch over the family had agreed upon. The 29th of September, the day that the Hokage had arranged to have Namake's Takashi's skills evaluated, had justified their assessment of his threat level when a number of them had witnessed the sheer level of destruction the man had wrought with a small handful of jutsu, coupled with the sheer volume of chakra the man had thrown around like it was candy. It was also patently obvious that the man had only been half-trained, otherwise the damage would have been far worse. The damage the half-trained man had done to Training Ground 16 had been extensive. And Yamato knew exactly how bad it was because he had been the one responsible for repairing the field and growing new trees to replace those that had been destroyed. When the Hokage had called Yamato to his office on the 4th, shortly after his shift of guard duty had ended, he had thought that he was just there to give the Sandaime an update on his observations. He was completely unprepared for Sarutobi to ask him if he'd be willing to take the green-eyed man as an apprentice for the next 18 months. He had questioned the Hokage's reasons for choosing him, Yamato believing that there were plenty of other jounin that were more qualified to teach the man. The Hokage's answer had been to hand him the summary sheet from Namake's shinobi evaluation. Yamato would learn why Sarutobi thought he was qualified to teach the other man when he finally reached the comment section at the very bottom of the summary. Applicant, Namake's Takashi, age, 21, height, 5 feet 6 inches, weight, 170 pounds, Kekkei Genkai, unnamed, description, increased healing factor, ability to speak with / summon the spirits of the dead, potential ability to manipulate and combine multiple elements, examples include ice and lava, stats, stamina, 5.0, speed, 2.5, force, 2.0, taijutsu, 2.0, ninjutsu, 3.0, genjutsu, 0.0, fuinjutsu, 2.5, kenjutsu, 4.0, shurikenjutsu, 2.5, intelligence, 4.5, total ability, 28.0/32.5 including LP, 2.8 average /3.25 including LP, latent potential, LP 4.5, luck, 5.0, chakra rating, Kage level reserves, Genin level control, skill levels, physical condition, mid Genin, weapons handling, high Chunin/low Jounin. Battlefield strategy, high Jounin. Overall ranking, Chunin. Comments, applicant is a Jinchuriki, Bijou, unknown, displayed an uncommonly high level of situational awareness on the battlefield, doesn't appear to know when to quit, excessively stubborn, showed a potentially unhealthy disregard for personal safety, demonstrated the ability to think on his feet, and easily adapted his strategies in order to counter his opponent's tactics. Applicant has a wealth of untapped potential that could be lost if he is not properly trained. Applicant also has serious trust issues with authority figures that could be a potential problem. Loyalty is to his family first and foremost, and any attempts to manipulate his family in order to control him, most especially the children, will likely goad the applicant into attacking viciously. Any handler assigned to mentor the applicant is advised to proceed with caution when attempting to gain the applicant's trust and avoid withholding information or needlessly antagonizing the applicant's family if at all possible. Recommendations, Sarutobi, I seriously suggest that you don't stuff this up by taking a heavy-handed approach to Namake's training and work schedule. Right now the young man is a relatively blank slate with explosive power at his command, and with the right approach, you could end up with an emotionally stable Jinchuriki that has the potential to match Kushina and Mitosama's control over his Bijou, only with less power since the Kyubi is already accounted for. At the same time, a single mistake could turn him into a bloodthirsty psychopath that is somewhere between 4 and 7 times more powerful than the unstable child host that currently holds the Ichibi, as the 1, 2, 3, and 8-tailed demons are all accounted for. That leaves numbers 4 through 7 as the potential passenger that our young friend is carrying. Shikaku. Namikaze Takashi was a Jinchuriki. As the only survivor of Orochimaru's failed attempts to integrate the cells of the Shodai Hokage into a living host, and by some twist of fate he had also turned out to be the traitorous Sanin's only successful attempt at the experiment, Yamato was, perhaps, the only one qualified to train Namikaze Takashi. As the forced inheritor of the Shodai's genetic material, Yamato had acquired the Shodai's vaunted Kekkei Genkai, the Mokuton. Alongside of the ability to manipulate plants, most notably trees, and transform his chakra into wood, Yamato had also inherited the Shodai's ability to subdue the Bijou. Yamato was being asked to train Takashi because he was the only one with the ability to stop the 21-year-old if he should lose control and unleash the Bijou he carried. He could have theoretically taught Naruto for the same reasons, and the only reason why he wasn't assigned to the younger Jinchuriki was due to the fact that the kid was actually far less likely to snap at the moment. Well, that and Sarutobi had long ago promised the training of the young Uzumaki, now Namikaze, over to Kakashi once he became a genin. Knowing that, any reservations that Yamato might have had about taking an apprentice that was only 2 years younger than him had vanished. He was honor-bound to protect and serve the village, and if training the young head of the new Namikaze family was what was required of him, then train him he would. The moment he had accepted, Sarutobi had assigned him a new code name, Yamato, and ordered him to show up on the ledge outside of the Hokage's office by no later than 2 o'clock that afternoon, wearing standard shinobi gear so that he could be formally introduced to his new apprentice. Pulling his attention back to the present, Yamato addressed his new apprentice. I was fortunate enough to observe your physical evaluation last week and therefore won't need to drag you off for another assessment right now, but I am interested in hearing an overview of your current training schedule. Do you have time right now to join me for a cup of tea and an order of dango? So long as you don't mind if our chat takes place in a slightly less public locale than the dango stand, then I have plenty of time. Yamato-san, or I suppose I should say Shirsho, unless you prefer that I call you sensei. Takashi replied with an indifferent tone that morphed into confusion by the end of his sentence. Since we are rather close in age, you are welcome to address me as senpai or san, whichever you feel most comfortable with. Yamato replied after taking note how uncomfortable the younger man was in his uncertainty. And it does not matter to me where we hold our discussion. That works for me. I have tack that needs to be cleaned and inspected for stress damage. Yamato followed the younger and shorter man out through the door in a companionable if moderately tense silence. Chapter 18, Survival Training. Saturday, October 6, 2001, all day. Training Ground 44, Konoha no Sato, Hai no Kuni. Welcome to Training Ground 44, or as those who have dared to venture beyond the fence call it, the Forest of Death. Yamato declared in a dramatic voice as he gestured towards the 30-foot-tall fence that separated the dark and foreboding forest from the rest of the world. Are there any soul-sucking demons, whose mere presence can suck the happiness out of an entire village, living in there? Harry asked as he peered into the shadows beneath the trees and fondly, and in a few cases not so fondly, recalled his many adventures in the Forbidden Forest. Ah no demons, Yamato awkwardly replied as the normally unflappable man faltered for a brief moment. The man obviously uncertain over whether or not Harry was being serious when he asked his question. Just lots and lots of vicious man-eating forest dwellers and deadly poisonous foliage. So desu ka? Harry asked absently as he reached up to scratch his chin thoughtfully. Sounds like there's nothing we really need to worry about then, any? Yamato blinked at him in surprise, or possibly disbelief, before he shook his head and unlocked one of the 44 gates through which most individuals accessed the interior of the dark and foreboding training ground. As Harry followed the slightly older man through the gate, he couldn't help but smirk. He bet the man had hoped to intimidate or shock him by revealing the alternate name of the forest and the fact that the denizens were known to attack humans. Too bad his new instructor/minder apparently hadn't gotten the memo that deadly creatures and plants were pretty much old hat for Harry. After all of the adventures he'd gotten into through the years, Harry figured the Forest of Death would be a cakewalk in comparison. Right, since the main objective here is for me to evaluate your survival skills, I'm going to be observing you from a distance for a time. Though I will step in if at any time your life is in real danger and it becomes clear that you will be unable to deal with the threat. Yamato explained as he closed and locked the gate once they were both inside of the forest. Do you have any questions? Last night you mentioned something about a mission that we'd be completing while we were here. What are we supposed to be doing for that? Harry inquired as he glanced upwards to take in the towering trees that were even larger than those that had lined the road that had brought him and his small family to Konoha. The mission itself is rather simple and straightforward. We're to clear out the trash from the river that cuts through the forest. The danger lies in the various creatures that we will inevitably run into while working and traveling. We have to clear the entire river. No, we just have to clean the half of the river that runs south from the tower at the center of the forest. The mission to clear out the northern half of the river has been taken by another team. Ah, got it. I take it that means that we are not the only shinobi running wild through the forest. That is correct, though it is doubtful that we will cross paths with any of the other chunin and jounin that are currently training or completing a mission inside the Forest of Death. At least not until we reach the tower at the center of the forest where we may or may not run into the team clearing the northern half of the river. Am I going to have to worry about any of those other teams attacking me in order to test my survival skills? No, interference in another's training is highly frowned upon and all joint training sessions will be announced prior to commencement so that everyone involved is fully aware of who they are supposed to be working alongside during the training exercise. If you are attacked by another human while we are in here, chances are the person is a traitor, a spy, or an assassin, and I will intervene so that the person can be captured and sent to Ibiki for interrogation. Unfortunately, there's also a chance that you might run into other shinobi training and get caught up in their attack by accident, in which case I suggest you apologize and beat a hasty retreat. Joy, Harry murmured with a mildly sarcastic undertone that drew a smile from his companion, handler. Any other questions, Takashi-san? Are there any endangered creatures that I should avoid killing if at all possible? No, the conservatory is on the other side of the village. Then I guess I'm good to go. This is where we part company for the time being then, Yamato stated as he jumped up into the branches of the nearest tree and quickly vanished from sight. Harry stared at the place where the man had disappeared, almost 100% certain that he'd just watched the man melt into the tree, before he shook his head and glanced around him once more. He then sighed and pursed his lips as he considered his options: head straight for the tower at the center, follow the fence line to find the river, or wander aimlessly through the forest until he encountered something deadly. Knowing that their mission involved clearing out the river, Harry eventually decided to follow the fence line. It was far more logical to clear the river by moving upstream because the trash would be shifted by the current, meaning that if they started upstream and worked downstream, more trash would be washed down behind them and make it seem like they hadn't done their job properly. Course set, Harry drew his holy wand and cast the Point Me spell to get his bearings before he turned to his left and began trotting alongside of the fence. The pair had entered on the easternmost side of the forest. As he moved, Harry periodically cast a pair of revealing spells in order to search his immediate surroundings, one to search for humans and the other to search for animals, to see if there was anyone or anything nearby that he'd need to be concerned about. There wasn't. He then created a pair of Kage Bunshin to act as forward scouts and another pair to act as rear guards, a trick he started utilizing after the bandits had ambushed their caravan. Feeling better now that there was less of a chance of getting ambushed by one of the forest dwellers, Harry let his eyes scan his immediate surroundings as he steadily moved through the very edge of the forest. He took careful note of those plants he recognized as either being edible, or bearing edible fruit, or having medicinal properties, and took the time to harvest them since he'd been instructed not to bring any food with him. He needed to prove that he could live off of the land, after all. Harry felt a little nostalgic as he traveled and worked, the entire exercise bringing to mind the year he'd spent on the run with Hermione and Ron while they hunted for the Horcruxes and hid from the Death Eaters, only with far less fear and tension. The wizard would encounter his first forest denizen during his second hour in the forest. The moment that he realized what it was he was seeing, Harry had stopped and stared at it with fascination. He'd never seen a 10-foot-long centipede before, though he had seen spiders as big as cars. His interest in the creature turned into grim resignation when the monstrosity finally noticed his presence and promptly attacked him. Not wishing to find out the hard way whether or not the thing was venomous, Harry drew his holy wand and killed the centipede with a well-placed severing charm that sliced the creature in half vertically from head to the very last pair of legs. The large spider that tried to drop on him from the trees above half an hour later was thrown back using a banishing charm and obliterated completely with an overpowered blasting curse. Harry loathed spiders with a passion, especially man-sized spiders intent upon having him for a snack, ever since the Acromantula in the Forbidden Forest had sided with Voldemort during the final battle at Hogwarts. The small, vicious wild boar he stumbled on was a bit more difficult to deal with due to how fast the 1-foot-tall pig could move, and Harry ended up sheathing his wand and drawing his broadsword to take the creature down. On the plus side, he wouldn't have to worry about catching something for lunch later. Not long after he'd skinned, gutted, and butchered the wild boar, Harry finally reached the point where the river flowed through the fence some 4.5 hours after he'd entered the forest. Knowing that it would be best not to camp right beside the river, because the wild animals would come to the river for water, Harry retreated several meters into the forest and looked for a small clearing to set up camp. While he was doing that, Harry sent his clones to scout the river in order to take note of the dangerous creatures currently in the area and determine just how much trash had collected in the riverbed. An hour later, Harry had the wild boar wrapped up in a section of aluminum foil, from his supplies, lined with damp dock leaves alongside the wild onions, garlic, carrots, and nettles he'd harvested. The entire parcel was buried in the embers of his campfire next to a smaller foil-wrapped bundle holding several handfuls of wild chestnuts that he was roasting. The smells filling the small clearing were mouth-watering, and Harry was eagerly looking forward to the meal. As he kept a close eye on his lunch, so it didn't burn, Harry occasionally wondered where his minder was hiding. He'd not once sensed the man nearby, and he'd never shown up when Harry scanned his surroundings for human presence. The two reasons he was certain that the man was close by was because the man had said that he would be watching, and because he'd often felt eyes on him throughout the course of the morning, above and beyond those eyes that he knew belonged to the creatures of the forest. That made Harry wonder if the man intended to hide and spy on him the entire time, and that if that was the case, if it meant that he'd be required to complete their supposed mission all by himself. Before Harry could decide on how he felt about that possibility, Yamato turned up in the middle of his camp quite unexpectedly. "You've had a very busy and productive morning," Yamato stated with a smile as he joined Harry by the fire. "It's been rather relaxing too," Harry murmured as he used a stick to flip the packet of chestnuts over. "I don't usually get much time to myself because the children require so much of my attention, though Eri and Arata are always willing to lend a hand and Naruto is rather self-sufficient. I've also not really had much of a chance to relax since the day Arata contacted me with the news that we had a little cousin that appeared from out of nowhere quite unexpectedly. You are the first person that I have met that considers wandering through the forest of death a vacation. Not even Mitarashi Anko considers this place relaxing, and this is her favorite training ground." Harry snorted in amusement as he flipped the roasting boar meat and vegetable bundle next. "You've never had the pleasure of dealing with two hyperactive kids on a sugar rush while they were suffering from extreme boredom, have you?" "No, I can't say that I have. Consider yourself lucky, Yamato-san. There is nothing more torturous than two rambunctious children bursting with more energy than they know what to do with and no active outlet in which to expend that energy. I'll keep that in mind if I ever decide to start a family or find myself watching someone else's child. Seeing as how you've essentially been assigned as my keeper for at least the next 18 months, I'm sure you'll get the opportunity to experience it fairly soon, since there will be days when you will spend time around Naruto and Satoshi. Anyway, it appears that lunch is finished and I made more than enough to share, if you want some." As the two men eagerly dug into the roasted boar meat, Yamato lightly grilled Harry on his decision to follow the fence line instead of striking inwards. He also questioned Harry's decision to remain on the forest floor instead of taking to the trees in order to reduce his travel time. The Jounin was slightly surprised to learn that Harry didn't know how to travel through the treetops, and Harry had to explain that where he was from there were fewer trees, and most of them didn't grow big enough or close enough together to use them as an alternate path. After the meal, Yamato had Harry break camp and remove all traces of their presence before they headed to the river in order to start the mission. Yamato had seen enough of Harry's skills over the course of the morning to know he could live off the land and defend himself from low-level threats. Harry was then given a chance to demonstrate his grasp of water walking, which still wasn't as good as Naruto's and was nowhere near Yamato's level. At the same time, he was given a demonstration of Yamato's ability to manipulate both water and earth as the man dredged the bottom of the riverbed and had the water spit the trash out onto the shore. That, of course, sparked Harry's competitive nature, and he couldn't resist showing off a little as he summoned all of the lost and discarded weapons that had been dropped in the area using the Elder Wand. He caught half a dozen river trout near sunset for supper in the same manner. Yamato then showed off by growing a living net out of reeds that would prevent the current from dumping more trash in the portion they already cleared when he called an end to the day. All in all, the two of them managed to clear out the entire eastern fork of the river over the course of the afternoon, and they set up a new camp for the evening beside the point where the river split. While Yamato cooked the fish, Harry sorted through the junk they'd hauled from the river, separating out the trash from the recyclables and the weapons. Those weapons that were still in reasonably good condition were split between the two of them, while those that were useless were set aside to be sold to one of the blacksmiths in the village so they could be repaired or melted down and recast. He then sealed everything into storage scrolls in order to make disposing of them, or recycling them, far easier. Before they retired for the night, Yamato began teaching Harry how to move through the trees by growing a circle of 2-foot-tall stumps that were 3 feet apart around the edge of the clearing, and making Harry run laps around the clearing without letting his feet touch the ground. Yamato periodically encouraged Harry to pick up his pace by throwing a slew of shuriken at him once he got the hang of jumping from trunk to trunk. Halfway through the training, Yamato removed half of the stumps so that the remaining stumps were now 6 feet apart in order to get him to use his chakra to increase the distance he could cover with each jump. By the time he crawled into his sleeping bag, Harry was tired and sore from the rather intense training session, but feeling rather good about how easily he'd adapted to the new method of travel, though he'd still need lots of practice before he mastered the new form of travel. He had exactly 5 hours of undisturbed sleep before the proximity wards he'd set up out of habit were tripped by the biggest damn bear he'd ever seen. The damn thing must have stood close to 4 times Harry's height as it reared up on its hind legs and roared out its anger at discovering a pair of trespassers in its domain. The severing charm that Harry cast at it only did enough damage to piss it off even more, and Harry chose to retreat up the nearest tree to escape its claws and teeth because he had no desire to get close enough to stab the beast with his little swords. Unfortunately, the tree offered no respite as the bear simply cut it down with 3 slashes of its claws. Harry cursed long and loud in both English and Japanese as he rode the tree down, too afraid to jump because he'd lost track of the damn bear, though how one could lose sight of a bear that large was a mystery. While that was happening, Yamato was attempting to contain the bear using his mokutan, but was not having much success due to the bear biting and clawing through the beams of wood he made almost as quickly as he grew them. Yamato's efforts had at least drawn the bear away from a rattled Harry before he staggered out of the remains of the shattered branches of the tree, after it crashed into the ground. Shaking off his disorientation, Harry ran up another tree in order to get above the bear and ran through the long chain of hand seals needed to send a Raryuden at the bear. The second the giant dragon of lightning poured forth from his hands, Harry whistled loudly to draw both Yamato's and the bear's attention, allowing Yamato to get out of the way without the bear chasing after him. Harry cursed under his breath when the bear walked away from the attack with nothing more than singed fur. From his left, he heard Yamato use a few rather inventive curses that he filed away for later use. "What the hell is that damn thing? There's no way that's an ordinary bear," Harry muttered under his breath before he was forced to abandon his perch as the furious bear rushed the tree he was hiding. In the end, it would take Yamato dropping the bear into a 30-foot deep hole that Harry filled to the top with water as Yamato grew hundreds of thick wooden beams to pin the bear at the bottom of the pit before Harry froze the water to kill the bear. Both men had then collapsed to the ground in exhaustion and pain, both of them sporting numerous bruises and gashes from what had ended up being an hour-long battle. "You know, Yamato-san, I don't think I like the spot you chose to set up camp," Harry wearily stated as he tore his gaze away from the frozen pit trap. "In all of the years I've been training within this forest, this is the first time I've ever run into a bear that large. The bears here also usually not that hard to kill, your right-on attack should have killed it. Figures, that's the way my luck usually runs." That would have been useful information to have ahead of time, Yamato deadpanned as he turned to stare at Harry. He then wearily climbed to his feet as he asked, "I know I saw you take at least one hit. How serious are your injuries?" "Mostly just bumps and bruises, but I think you ripped open the back of my right calf," Harry replied as he took stock of his aches and pains. "What about you? How bad is your shoulder?" "Still bleeding, but it doesn't feel too deep." "I suppose this will be an excellent time to evaluate your knowledge of emergency first aid." Harry shot a disbelieving look at his Jounin trainer that the man either missed in the darkness or outright ignored. The wizard was then caught off guard as Yamato literally grew a small one-room cabin in under 5 minutes. Now, he hadn't thought much about the man manipulating living plants, growing stumps, or even about creating animated beams of wood during the battle with the bear, but he had not been prepared to see him grow an entire building. Sure, he'd heard about Senju Hashirama's ability to manipulate wood thanks to Minato's history lessons, but he'd never imagined that it could be used to grow houses. When Harry asked Yamato if he was related to the Shodai Hokage, he was more than a little surprised when the man grew extremely uncomfortable and denied any relationship to the Senju clan. Despite being curious about how Yamato had ended up with a rare Kekii Genkai if he wasn't related to the clan in which the Kekii Genkai originated, Harry let the matter drop and apologized for prying. The uncomfortable moment eventually passed as Harry cleaned, treated, and bandaged Yamato's shoulder and his own leg, using a liberal amount of essence of Dittany to speed up the healing process. The rest of the night passed uneventfully as they slept safely inside of the homegrown cabin. For the first time in over 2 years, Harry did not wake with the rising sun, not counting the small handful of days when he stayed up all night doing research. Yamato was already awake and cooking a late breakfast by the time Harry walked outside looking for the man. Harry's attention was immediately snagged by the carcass of the bear, which Yamato had hauled out of the pit after the ice had finished melting with the rising of the sun and propped up on a wood rack. The beast looked far larger in the light of day than it had the previous night when it had been half hidden in shadows. "What are you going to do with that? Wouldn't it have been far easier to just bury it?" Harry asked when he finally tore his eyes from the bear and joined Yamato at the campfire. "Normally, I would skin and butcher any bears I kill because bear meat is considered a delicacy, and since so few shinobi willingly tangle with the creatures it is something of a rarity. However, because of the difficulty we experienced with this particular specimen coupled with his extraordinary size, I will seal it into a scroll once its fur has dried and deliver it to the Nara after we finish our mission in order to have their researchers study him. If the animals in this forest are developing a measure of immunity against high-level attacks, the Hokage will need to know so that any missions or training exercises that are scheduled to take place in the forest are ranked appropriately in order to avoiding losing the younger and more inexperienced shinobi. Oh. Would you like me to dry him out for you? If you want to, you're welcome to try, but the last of the water will evaporate by lunchtime." Harry's response was to use his wand to banish the water clinging to the bear's fur with a ringing spell that literally pushed the fur down flat to push the water out. He then cast a drying spell on the bear to pull the last of the moisture out of the fur before he turned to Yamato and asked, "Did you already have a storage scroll prepped to seal him in, or would you like me to draw one for you? Do you know how to link preservation seals to the storage seals in order to preserve the body?" "Yes. Then I'll leave you to take care of the bear after we eat while I finish repairing the clearing." "All right," Harry replied as he dug into his inner pockets for a blank scroll, a quill, and his bottle of sealing ink, which had been infused with his and Naruto's chakra and blood as well as with his magic, so that he could prepare the scroll while Yamato finished cooking their meal. By lunchtime, the bear had been sealed away, the clearing completely repaired, their camp cleared away, and the temporary cabin ungrown. The two of them had then spent the rest of the day working their way north along the eastern bank of the river, clearing out the trash as they went. Unlike the previous afternoon, there was little showing off as the two men cleared the debris from the water and removed large obstructions that were hindering the current. Periodically, Yamato would grow additional reed nets to catch trash so that if they missed anything, they could pick it up on their way out. They did not stop working until the last rays of the sun had vanished. After another supper of freshly caught fish and an hour of stump jumping, Yamato had ordered Harry up into the trees to sleep in nothing but a tarp, another test as there were times when it was prudent not to make a camp when outside of the village on a mission. This time, the man was testing his ability to sleep in an awkward perch through the night while hiding his presence from the predators that would be stalking the forest below. Harry said not a word of complaint. He had no desire to face a second bear even if it might be smaller and easier to kill than the first one. Both men were up and moving with the sun, and breakfast, comprised of leftover fish from the night before, was eaten cold and supplemented with fresh berries and fruit, harvested from the forest as they worked. They would reach the tower in the center of the forest an hour before noon and briefly meet with the team that had taken the mission for the northern half of the river. The two of them then turned around and headed back down the river after crossing over to the western bank. This time, Yamato had Harry practice traveling through the tree tops while he traveled beneath the wizard in case he slipped from the branches or misjudged a jump. They made good time, since there was very little work that needed to be done, and reached the fork in the river an hour before sunset. After they set up camp, Yamato sparred with Harry while there was still daylight left. The man correcting Harry's form and pointing out holes in his technique with the help of Minato and Kushina's spirits after the wizard had called forth the kunoichi upon Minato's suggestion. The Jounin surprisingly didn't blink an eye when Minato appeared shortly after Kushina's spirit stepped out of thin air. Apparently, Yamato was rather fond of scary ghost stories, and the proof that real ghosts existed appealed to him. Their evening meal that night would be disrupted by another oversized creature. This one a snake that was slightly larger than the basilisk that Harry had killed when he was 12. At the time, Harry had been skinning the pair of rabbits that Yamato had sent him out to hunt. Well, he'd sent him to catch something other than fish, when the enormous reptile slithered up to their camp, the snake drawn to the scent of fresh blood. The giant reptile had approached the camp from behind Harry, and he had felt his proximity ward being triggered at the same time as Yamato had jerked his head up from where he'd been starting the fire. "I smell blood. So close, so fresh blood mixed with the scent of humans. Oh, the scent of blood and human makes me so hungry." Harry froze and closed his eyes as the snake's voice brought back so many of his darkest memories, the entirety of his second year, the vision of attacking Mr. Weasley as Nagini in his fifth, encountering Nagini masquerading as Bathilda Bagshot, and watching Nagini kill Snape, to name the worst of the memories. White-hot fury shot through Harry before the final memory finished playing out behind his mind's eye. He hated being forced to watch the more terrible memories of his past. "Go away, serpent, you will find no food here," Harry hissed through clenched teeth as he dropped the knife he'd been using to skin the rabbits and unsheathed his broadsword. "You are not our contract holder, you cannot order me to do your bidding, even if you are a filthy speaker," the snake hissed in reply as it rose up behind Harry and prepared to strike. "If you attempt to attack me or my companion, then I will not hesitate to kill you. Leave now and I will allow you to live. This forest belongs to the snakes and filthy speakers are unwelcome here. Manda will reward me for devouring you and ridding the world of another thieving human that has stolen our voice." "It's your funeral," Harry retorted as he clasped the hilt of the broadsword in both hands and thrust upwards at the same time as the snake opened its mouth and struck downwards to swallow him. The sword slammed home through the snake's brain at the same time as the snake's mouth closed around Harry. The wizard gamely hung onto his sword as the snake thrashed around in death, his entrapment inside of the mouth actually saving him from being seriously injured, since he could have been crushed by the snake's death throes if he had been on the outside. Still, it was an experience that he could have done without as being roughly shaken about while covered in a combination of snake spit, venom, and blood was distinctly unpleasant. When the snake finally fell still, Harry wrenched his sword free and stuck it through his belt to free his hands. He then crawled to the very front of the mouth and curled his shoulders forward as he stood up and forced the snake's mouth open so he could climb out. The 4 rows of snake teeth lining the roof of the snake's mouth between its fangs briefly caught on his cloak but thankfully did not slice through the thick dragon hide. A split second later, Yamato was giving him a hand as a long beam of wood grew from the man's finger and forced the snake's mouth all the way open in the blink of an eye so that Harry could step out. "You know how I told you the other day that I didn't think I liked your chosen camping location, Yamato-san?" Harry asked as he wiped snake blood, venom, and spit from his face and spat out the bit that had gotten in his mouth while he was being thrown around. "Well, I've come to the conclusion that I bloody well hate the places you picked to set up camp. And I'm beginning to suspect that your luck rating was mistakenly inverted when Shikaku filled out your evaluation, Takashi-san." "Why? Did he leave off the negative sign?" Harry quipped with a humorless laugh as he stared down at the mess that had been made of his clothes. "Well, at least you can joke about it. Are you injured?" "Just my ego, stupid snake wouldn't leave when I told it to. You do know that any creature whose entire species is under a summoning contract will never obey anyone but their contract holders whether they are an actually summons or not, right? And how exactly did you ask it to leave?" "All I heard was a bunch of hissing." Harry shifted uncomfortably as he disliked discussing the abilities that he'd gotten from being in close contact with Voldemort's Horcrux for more than half of his life. In the end, he decided it was probably best to say something now before his ability was brought up in front of a large crowd that could turn on him, like when almost the entire school had turned against him in his second year. Sighing, he pulled out his holly wand and began cleaning himself off, before the snake's blood, venom, or saliva ruined his cloak, as he quietly replied, "I have a secondary Kekii Genkai that grants me the ability to speak to all snakes and serpents. Usually, it allows me to order or ask them to leave me alone, or in the case of the 3 boomslangs that I brought with me, ask them to protect my valuables for me. Not all snakes like to be ordered about though, and the one I just killed was actually upset that I could speak to it using the snake language. It's not an ability I was born with and I rarely ever use it because I don't like the memories associated with it, but it has come in handy a time or two and saved my life, on more than one occasion. And no, I wasn't aware that a summoning contract affected an entire class of creatures to the point where they only obeyed those that signed their contracts. Minato only covered the basics of summoning since there were no contracts available at the time and there were far more important things for me to learn. What a strange ability, Yamato mused. Being associated with snakes here in Konoha is not a good thing though, due to the terrible things that Orochimaru has done. I will have to report the ability to the Hokage, but I will at least keep it out of my written report so that the information will not spread to the wrong people. Thanks, I appreciate that, and I figured that you'd have to tell the Hokage. I would have mentioned it myself, but the ability carries the same stigma from where I grew up because another person with the same ability did a great many terrible things before he was stopped, so I do my best to avoid bringing it up. How did you get the ability if you weren't born with it? If you don't mind me asking. The other person I mentioned unintentionally gave me the ability the first time he tried to kill me. The subject was dropped at that point as the two of them dealt with the enormous snake that was cluttering up their camp. Harry ended up skinning the giant snake when Yamato declared his intention to bury the carcass. He wasn't one for collecting trophies, but the snake's skin was both lightweight and strong enough to deflect kunai and shuriken, if not a sword, and would make a potentially suitable replacement cloak if his dragon hide cloak got ruined and he didn't feel like dealing with the hassle of ordering a new cloak without the benefit of trying it on for size before he shelled out that much money or making one himself, since dragon hide was notoriously difficult to work with due to its magic-resistant nature. The remainder of their time in the forest was blessedly uneventful and short as they finished clearing the western fork of the river shortly after 3 in the afternoon on the 9th. Chapter 19, Everlasting Impressions. Wednesday, October 10, 2001, Night. Konoha no Sato, Hai no Kuni, Hataki Kakashi, aka Umbu Ticho Inu, Sharingan no Kakashi, Kopi Ninja no Kakashi, and genius son of the Konoha no Shiroi Kiba, eyed the glittering gold dragon of burning sparks that pranced boldly across the sky with curiosity before he dropped his gaze to study the young man that had unleashed the firework that created the magnificent creature. Namikaze Takashi's attention was currently focused on the only 2 children in the group, allowing Kakashi to study the man without being caught in the act. Specifically, the man was watching Uzumaki Naruto, or as he was now known, Namikaze Naruto. The head of the Namikaze family was a walking contradiction in Kakashi's eyes. The man at first glance appeared like any other civilian until you noticed the way he carried himself. He was open and friendly at first appearance too, until you managed to piss him off. An angry Namikaze Takashi was a man to be feared as he either glared you into submission or verbally cut you down with that sharp tongue of his. At least the only thing that seemed to trigger the man's temper was any threat or slight, whether real or imagined, that was directed at one of the 2 children. As far as Kakashi could tell, anyway. The man's skills were another puzzle as he had demonstrated a fairly devastating array of offensive jutsu with only a small number of defensive jutsu thrown in. His ability to manipulate the elements was rather impressive even if his control over the various jutsu he used wasn't anything to write home about. That he had the chakra reserves to throw around over 20 of the elemental dragon attacks back to back and combine 2 or more of them into a single attack was enough to make the silver-haired Jounin sweat bullets. He also appeared to have an affinity with the fire element that would make an Uchiha green with envy, and because each attack, bar the Karyudan no jutsu he'd used, had been CLS meant that it was impossible to copy them with the Sharingan. The rest of the man's arsenal had been fairly low level, a competent grasp of the basic 3, even if he couldn't use the basic Bunshin to save his life, a useful camouflage jutsu, a couple of elemental clones, a wide array of elemental whips and walls, and the ability to create elemental creatures that could attack. The most unsettling skills the man had demonstrated though, aside from the devastating dragon attacks, had been Minato's Rasengan and the Hirashin no Jutsu. Kakashi hadn't thought that there was anyone alive aside from Genma and Reidu who could use the Hirashin. They had been taught by the Yondaime and they could only use it if both of them plus one more fueled the jutsu. And yet, Namikaze Takashi had used Minato's signature jutsu with the same ease that Minato had once used it, though the man hadn't used Minato's tri-blade kunai, using instead pre-drawn paper tags that he'd scattered about the clearing just before demonstrating the jutsu. Of course, it probably helped that the green-eyed man had had a private tutor in the form of Minato-sensei's ghost. If what he'd heard was true and the man possessed the ability to speak to the dead. The silver-haired Jounin hadn't actually seen the ghost of his sensei as of yet though. Kakashi was drawn out of his musings as the man he'd been considering set about launching another firework into the sky, this one a huge red dragon that attacked the gold dragon that was still trotting about the sky. Kakashi did a double take at that, the first dragon should have dissipated immediately. He was further shocked and the two dragons exploded upon impact, creating hundreds of red and gold lions that scattered in every direction. There was no way in hell that those were normal fireworks. Fireworks did not scamper off across the sky as if they'd been given a life of their own. Then again, Kakashi thought to himself. Namikaze-san showed remarkable control over the elements during his demonstration. It wouldn't be too far-fetched for him to have created those fireworks and imbued them with his chakra in order to get them to act that way. It also confirms that he has an affinity for fire. I wonder if Tenzu, no, I need to remember to call him Yamato now, has tested the man yet. I'll ask him later and offer him some chakra paper if he hasn't. Kakashi then turned his attention to the sole genin he'd been assigned to teach, Uzumaki Naruto, Jinchuriki of the Kyubi, and consummate prankster. Well, he supposed that he should stop thinking of Naruto as an Uzumaki and start thinking of him as a Namikaze now that the boy's heritage was no longer a secret. Kakashi had met Naruto when he was 3, the day that the Sandaime had assigned him and his Umbu team to guard the blonde. The 25-year-old still suspected that the assignment had been Sarutobi's way of preventing him from taking any more suicide missions and keeping him in the village, where his many enemies couldn't get to him as easily. At first, Kakashi had wanted to resent the reassignment. That had changed the first time he'd seen someone attack Minato and Kushina's precious son. Naruto had quickly become Kakashi's reason for living after that and he'd taken great pleasure in delivering those that dared attack Naruto or spoke of what they knew about the Kyubi to Ibiki. He'd soon been told to leave the civilians alone though, the council had disapproved of Umbu Shinobi harassing the civilians on Naruto's behalf. That hadn't stopped Kakashi from intervening when he could though, and he made it a point to be particularly vigilant during the evening hours when the drunken mobs formed if even the smallest glimpse of the blonde was caught. After 5 years of watching over the hyperactive blonde, Kakashi had thought he'd known the kid well enough to know when he was up to something. Sadly, Naruto had proved just how little Kakashi had known the kid when said kid had slipped out of the village on his watch using the Kage Bunshin of all things, at least. That was what the Hokage had told him had happened after Sarutobi had finished interviewing the small family. When Naruto had first disappeared though, Kakashi had thought the kid had been kidnapped. And he'd been angry at himself for not preventing someone from taking the kid, angry at the Hokage for not catching wind of the kidnapping before it happened, angry at the village for the way they had treated Naruto, and angry at the person who'd stolen his reason for living. The only good thing that had come out of Naruto's vanishing act had been the Sandaime Hokage taking back control of the village. The purging that had followed had been long overdue and Kakashi had reveled in finally making some of the more persistent bullies pay for the way they had treated Naruto. Dealing with the members of the council had been even more satisfying. The fact that the purges hadn't produced a hail if somewhat terrified and tormented Naruto had only fueled Kakashi's anger and driven him towards depression. The only reason he hadn't returned to taking suicide missions at the end of the purging was because Sarutobi had refused to allow him throw his life away. It had been sheer coincidence that Kakashi had been patrolling the walls near the western gate when Namikaze Takashi had made his appearance. Kakashi had been so certain that the man was an imposter but he'd nearly forgotten all about the black-haired man claiming to be part of Minato's family when Naruto stepped down out of the first wagon carrying a 3-year-old that was a near clone of the older boy. Despite Naruto looking slightly different and obviously being 3 years older, Kakashi had recognized him and his scent easily enough. Kakashi had been torn between hugging the stuffing out of his little lost charge and ripping the man that had dared call himself a Namikaze into itty-bitty pieces. The Jounin had looked forward to carting the man off for an appointment with Ibiki after the man had threatened him with bodily harm in response to the Hokage's order for Kakashi to remove the children from the office. He had then reassessed his opinion of the man after listening to the man rip into the Hokage next. Kakashi had momentarily been reminded of the day that Minato had torn into a civilian for making a disparaging remark about Kakashi's father to Kakashi shortly after his father had killed himself. Even the sheepish apology the man had given after his small rant had been rather similar to the way Minato used to apologize to Kushina when his sensei had irritated his volatile wife. All thoughts of Namikaze Takashi had taken a back seat during the 3 hours he'd spent entertaining Naruto and Namikaze's little boy. It reassured him to know that his little charge, Kakashi couldn't bring himself to call Naruto his little brother even if that was how he saw him, was still the ramen-obsessed little boy he'd watched over for 5 years. The only thing out of place was the blonde-haired and green-eyed boy that Naruto treated like a sibling. Seeing Naruto act all responsible had thrown Kakashi for a real loop because it wasn't something he'd ever thought the hyperactive blonde would be capable of until he reached at least his 30s. That the two boys were close was undeniably obvious. The little blonde had clung to the older blonde with a limpet-like tenacity that the older blonde encouraged. That Naruto was also painfully close to Takashi had also become obvious as the kid had ceaselessly expounded upon how awesome his cousin was for nearly the entire time they'd been at Ichiraku's eating ramen. Kakashi had wanted to hate Takashi in that moment, the jounin angry that the man had stepped in and taken the place that should have been his. Being asked to take Naruto, and 2 others to be assigned at a later date, as his student, something he'd been promised shortly after being reassigned to watch over the blonde 8 years earlier, had tempered that resentment, as had the sheer destruction that Takashi had unleashed on the training grounds during his physical assessment. Now, Kakashi had been well acquainted with Naruto's academy records and knew that half the problem was that the kid had been kicked out of classes and denied a proper education, and the other half of the problem had been the kid's inability to sit still for more than 2 minutes at a time. That the kid had aced all of the assessment tests, both written and physical, had therefore come as a bit of a surprise but not completely unexpected because he'd known the kid wasn't stupid. How else could he have pulled off some of his more memorable pranks and escaped capture for hours? Even knowing that had not prepared Kakashi for facing the blonde in a one-on-one spar. Not only was Naruto a chakra powerhouse just like his older cousin, the little gaki had to be one of the most unorthodox shinobi he'd ever fought. The kid could plot and plan on a dime better than any Nara, he could throw his weight around like an Akimichi, and by using the Kage Bunshin he could see just as well as any Hyuga. His taijutsu form was nowhere near as sloppy as it had been while he'd been attending the academy, and Kakashi could easily see the influence of the Mizukan Ryo in his moves, though the kid was nowhere near as fluid as his cousin was when it came to using that particular taijutsu form. The kid was still too much of a brawler. But the kid had improved by leaps and bounds during the 3 years he'd been gone. He'd also learned more than just the basic 3 academy jutsu on top of teaching himself the Kage Bunshin no jutsu. Seeing a not quite 11-year-old boy effortlessly form the Rasengan had been shocking. Seeing said kid then vanish in a familiar zing of yellow light had nearly broken Kakashi. The kid was nowhere near as proficient with the transportation jutsu as his cousin had been, but there was no mistaking that someone, Minato's ghost, his cousin, had taught the kid how to use the Hiraishin. Kakashi had wanted to cry at the time because it seemed as if someone else had done all of the work to turn the kid into a competent shinobi. He then realized that he'd actually been given a blessing in disguise because he could now hone the little prodigy of hard work into a legend. Sure, the little gaki was powerful, smart, and skilled, but he was also sloppy, unrefined, and filled to the brim with untapped potential. And he was all Kakashi's to teach, train, and mold. Providing his cousin didn't try to interfere. Yeah, that put a damper on Kakashi's dreams of training the next great legendary shinobi of Konoha. Kakashi had no doubt that Takashi wouldn't hesitate to follow through with his threat of skinning him alive and roasting him over an open fire if the man even suspected that Kakashi wasn't keeping Naruto's best interests in mind. And somehow, he just knew that pushing Naruto too far or too fast would set the green-eyed man off nearly as quickly as neglecting Naruto's training and education would. So, he'd have to be cautious in how he went about training his cute little student. Maybe I should speak to Takashi about Naruto's training, Kakashi silently mused as he tore his eyes from the blonde who was enjoying his private fireworks show. Takashi had gone all out for the kid's 11th birthday, to glance at the dark-haired man once more. I'm actually rather surprised that the man hasn't hauled me to one side and grilled me in regards to Naruto's training yet. It goes against everything I've learned about the man. Then again, 10. Yamato had hauled him off to the Forest of Death for survival training and they didn't get back until late yesterday afternoon. I wonder how Takashi fared and if they encountered any of the nastier residents of the forest while they were there. Tuesday, October 23, 2001, noon. Konoha no Sato, Hai no Kuni. Tokubetsu Jounin Mitarashi Anko, aka that crazy snake bitch, sat fuming as she glared at the rotting carcasses of the 4 snakes that had just 15 minutes earlier been part of the Senii Jashu she'd attempted to attack Namikaze Takashi with when the man had gotten mouthy with her. Anko had been out of the village on an A-ranked mission when the Namikaze family had arrived towards the end of September and had therefore missed most of the hullabaloo. By the time she and her team had returned, Takashi team had already been inducted into the force and sent off into her personal playground for survival training. Anko had looked forward to the brutal ribbing the foreign Chunin would undoubtedly receive the moment he had to be carried out of the forest of death in a blubbering mess. Few people could walk into her favorite training grounds without suffering from a traumatic experience, and she expected the rookie to be no different. When she'd heard that the team had killed one of her former sensei's pet projects, she'd been shocked to the core because she well knew how damned hard those monstrous experiments were to kill, and she had the scars from a pair of enraged tigers to prove it. Disbelief had followed in the wake of her shock, as there was no way a Chunin could have killed one of the genetically enhanced bears, even with the help of his assigned minder. Anko had immediately hunted down Tenzu to confront him on the matter and had found him discussing the creature in question with Nara Shikaku. Tenzu, who was going by the name of Yama or something like that now, had given her a harassed look the moment she demanded to know about the bear. Apparently quite a few people had been hounding the Jounin on the same subject. Shikaku had lazily confirmed that the bear in question was indeed one of Orochimaru's leftover experiments that had been left to run wild in the forest, and that it had been the largest bear he'd ever seen that wasn't a contracted summons. One of the bear's smallest claws fit from the tips of her fingers to the crook of her elbow when she'd measured the trophy once Shikaku had pulled it out as proof. Anko hadn't known what to say after that, as she tried to imagine just how large the creature must have been in relation to the size of the claw, and the only words echoing around in her head at the time had been, "Holy fuck." Just before Tenzu, damned if she could remember his new code name just then, left, Anko had asked him if his charge had faced any other interesting encounters with the numerous critters while in the forest. The man had laughed and asked her if killing one of the giant snakes that lived in the deadly forest with nothing but a sword while inside of the creature's mouth counted. Anko had imperiously ordered Tenzu to bring his new toy to the dango stand that afternoon so that she could meet him, and the man had the gall to say that she'd have to wait until he could arrange the meeting with his apprentice so as not to create a conflict with the man's training schedule. The kunoichi had nearly ripped Tenzu a new one over that until he bluntly told her that the man was related to the yondaime, had a nasty temper, knew enough destructive techniques to level Konoha, and had more than enough chakra to pull off said destruction in a fairly short amount of time. The fact that Tenzu had also bluntly stated that he would not have been able to kill the bear without the younger, and lower-ranked, man's help also spoke volumes. Anko knew there was quite a bit that Tenzu wasn't telling, because there were plenty of other powerful shinobi you'd be an idiot to piss off, such as Senju Tsunade, Yamaguchi Jiraiya, Sarutobi Hiruzen, Hatake Kakashi, Mado Gai, Tenzu, and Anko herself, just to name few. Staring the remains of the 4 snakes she'd summoned to attack the green-eyed Chunin, had Anko reluctantly adding Namikaze Takashi to that list in order to make certain she didn't forget before she returned to her seething. The meeting had taken far too many days to schedule in Anko's mind, and that was with the purple-haired kunoichi pestering Tenzu, damned if she was going to bother learning the man's new code named. It was too much work every other day. To appease herself, Anko had flat out told Tenzu that he was paying for her dango order when her fellow shinobi finally gave her a date and time. Tenzu had given her one of his famous dead-eyed glares that made most Chunin shit their shorts, but Anko ignored the look as she walked away. The entire meeting had been one frustrating failure from the moment Tenzu had walked into the shade of the dango stand with his charge in tow, along with a pair of gaki. There was nothing Anko hated more than snot-nosed little brats, and the man she was supposed to be meeting was dragging along 2 of them, one that didn't even look old enough to wipe his own ass, and the other cockily wore a shiny new Hitai-8. The moment she'd recognized the older gaki, Anko had reflexively glared. Uzumaki Naruto's disappearance 3 years earlier had seen the Hokage turning Konoha inside out and upside down to find him, while her own disappearance just 11 years prior to the gaki's vanishing act had been completely overlooked. Ice-cold eyes the color of leaves met Anko's pupil-less tan eyes a heartbeat later, and she'd nearly pissed her panties at the pure venom those eyes held. The man had then very pointedly handed the bewhiskered blonde a pouch of money, asked him to buy a couple of orders of dango to go, and then told him to take the younger boy, whose name Anko didn't bother to catch, back to the wagons. Tenzu had grimaced at the man's clipped tone and shot Anko an irritated glare, but she didn't see what had either man up in arms, because it's not like she'd done anything to either gaki. Tenzu had then warily led the man to her table and introduced the 2 of them. Namikaze had then had the gall to sneer at her as he looked her up and down once before he started walking away. When Anko ordered him to get his ass back to her table and sit down so she could talk to him, The man had had the gall to give her another sneer as he proclaimed that he had no interest in hearing anything she had to say. Only he'd used far sharper words that had cut Anko deeply. Those words seared through her mind once more at that point. I have nothing to say to you and I am not interested in hearing anything you have to say. To put it bluntly, Mitarashi-san, you are not worth my time. Anko had trembled and clenched her fists as killing intent had poured from her in waves and chased away the civilian customers that had been inside of the small stand. She'd immediately retaliated in response to the man's caustic words by attacking him with Senai Jashu so she could beat the arrogance out of the bastard before she made him bleed. Only, the man had merely turned his head to the side and hissed at her. And the damn snakes she'd sent to attack him stopped right in their tracks and hissed angrily back at the man. Another long hiss from the man had irritated the 4 snakes into continuing their attack. 2 seconds later, the 4 snakes were dead before they could bite the man, let alone wrap him in their deadly embrace. Anko had then found the bloodied tip of an unfamiliar sword tickling her throat and burning emerald eyes glaring at her from the other end of the blade. The words the man had hissed out in an icy cold voice filled with barely suppressed fury and hard as diamonds actually made Anko piss herself. Congratulations, Mitarashi-san, you've just jumped right up to the top of my shit list. You made my son cry. Sure enough, standing just a few feet beyond the highly pissed-off Chunin was Uzumaki holding a bawling kid in his arms, a ruined order of freshly made dango tragically sitting on the floor at their feet. Uzumaki was glaring at her with frozen sapphire eyes that promised pain and humiliation while the little gaki in his arms was white as a sheet, literally, his eyes, skin, and hair were all a uniform white. Wait, wasn't he blonde earlier? And stared at her with tormented eyes that rained tears down his face to join the snot running from his nose. The bite of the blade at her neck followed by a trickle of blood dripping down her throat had brought her gaze back to the man standing right in front of her. Come anywhere near me or my family again and I will make you scream and beg for death for a month of Sundays as I scrape the flesh from your bones with a rusty spoon and feed it to you while I allow my pet snakes to sharpen their fangs on your bones. The man had then pulled his blade away, cleaned the blood from it by wiping it off on her trench coat, and resheathed the blade before he turned his back to her once more. Anko had made just one attempt to rise from her seat only for Tenzu to shove her back into place with an iron grip. Unable to kill the man that had just insulted and attacked her, Anko had silently seethed as she watched the man approach the children and collect the belly-aching babe, who now looked like a carbon copy of the man, black hair and all. He had then formed a silent and sealless Kage Bunshin to clean up the mess from the floor and order a replacement batch of dango before he swept out of the stand with both brats without another glance in Anko's direction. Tenzu had called her 10 kinds of fools for pissing Namikaze off, told her she could pay for her own damned dango, and hurried off after the trio in order to do damage control, leaving Anko to seethe alone. The kunoichi was far too busy still seething to notice the 2 masked shinobi that appeared beside her just a few seconds after she'd chased away the dango stand civilian customers a second time. She couldn't help but notice them when they slapped a chakra suppression seal on the back of her neck and cuffed her hands behind her back. She opened her mouth to soundly curse the 2 umbu guards only to find herself with an obscene amount of dango being stuffed into her mouth, far too much to chew, let alone talk around. As they hauled her off to see either Ibiki or Hokage, there was only one thought circling through her mind. Namikaze Takashi would scream for her before she killed him as slowly and painfully as possible for daring to humiliate and threaten her. Her injured pride drowning out her common sense as she buried the memory of the way the man had made her piss herself with just a glare. Friday, October 26, 2001, morning. Konoha Gakure no Sato, Hai no Kuni. Marino Ibiki had never been considered much of a people person, especially not after he'd spent an unpleasant week at the mercy of Iwa's top torturers during the last war, and he grew even colder after his little brother had been killed by a traitor several years earlier. He was a large and intimidating man. It was an image that he had cultivated from the moment that he'd known that he would survive the torture he'd suffered through at the hands of the IWA shinobi. He was proud of his image. He could walk into a room and make lesser shinobi piss their pants with just a look. Inoichi, on the other hand, was insidious. The man seemingly made friends with everyone before he ripped their secrets from their mind with his clan's techniques. The 2 of them had the perfect interrogation routine. Ibiki would intimidate their prisoners and Inoichi would move in and soothe them before making his move. It never failed to work like a charm. At least it hadn't until the 2 of them had met one Namikaze Takashi. The man had the balls to look him in the eye and all but dismiss him as insignificant before he'd practically given Inoichi the stink eye. As if the man had just seen Inoichi kick an injured puppy. The man hadn't even flinched and Ibiki had been introduced as head of the torture and interrogation department. The meeting had turned surreal at that point as Minato's ghost made an appearance. Being adept at genjutsu himself, Ibiki had been certain that the green-eyed Gaki was just pulling one over on them right up until the Gaki had stopped channeling chakra and Minato's ghost hadn't so much as wavered. Finding out that that really had been Minato's ghost standing there in the flesh, or rather in the spirit, had been shocking. Learning that the supposed Namikaze had a Kekkei Genkai that allowed him to speak with the dead had been both troubling and intriguing. Hearing the ghost of the Sandaime Hokage casually reveal that the young man standing in front of them was playing host to one of the Bijou had been terrifying. The longer Ibiki had interrogated the young man alongside of Inoichi and the Hokage, the more frightened the intimidating man had grown as it became patently clear that the man was more than a little mentally unstable with a hair-trigger temper. Coupling that instability with the fact that the man was a Jinchuriki with insanely high chakra reserves was enough to give a Kage nightmares, let alone the lowly departmental head in charge of the least appreciated department in the entire village. The calm acceptance that Namikaze had shown when he'd basically been ordered to attend monthly therapy sessions had been unexpected, and Ibiki didn't know whether or not he should be annoyed over the fact that he would be the one responsible for conducting said sessions. Damn it, he was an interrogator, not a therapist. Ibiki had fully intended to point that out to the Hokage the moment the man had uttered that nonsense and remind the aging shinobi that Inoichi or one of the other Yamanaka in his department always handled the mentally disturbed right up until he saw the visible relief in Namikaze's eyes over the fact that he'd not have to see Inoichi for the sessions. That had actually intrigued Ibiki. He was burning with curiosity to know exactly what it was about Inoichi that set the younger man on edge. He also hadn't failed to notice that the man had only grown warier the moment Minato's ghost had brought up the Yamanaka's ability to mindwalk and view people's memories. That knowledge had opened a whole new can of worms, as the possibility that the man had something he wanted to hide wasn't too far-fetched. The fact that he couldn't bring Inoichi in to pry those secrets from the man's head was enough to give Ibiki a headache, and what made it worse was the fact that the man had bluntly told them that he didn't trust any one of them. Namikaze's lack of trust was troubling enough on its own, but when coupled with the man's volatile temper and the sheer power he had at his fingertips, it was downright disturbing. And there was no doubt that the Gaki was powerful. Ibiki had left Inoichi in charge of things on the day that Namikaze's physical assessment was scheduled just so that he could take the morning off to see what the man could do. All morning had unexpectedly turned into all day. Namikaze's taijutsu wasn't anything special, and saying he sucked and it came to shuriken jutsu would be an understatement, unless you counted the fact that the damn man had caught every single kunai, blocked the thrown shuriken, and dodged the senbon that Gemma had thrown at the man, all the while grinning like a loon. His kenjutsu was passable, so long as he was using the twin wakizashi blades or his unorthodox broadsword. That he'd apparently trained his horses to ignore the clashing blade to allow him to fight from the back of the beasts was rather fascinating. The concept of a mounted shinobi was beyond weird though. Shinobi were trained to move through any terrain on foot, they had no need for horses or oxen. And yet, Namikaze had looked completely at home on the back of his horses, swinging that straight sword with one hand while guiding his horse with his other hand and his knees. Those three skills hadn't been what he'd gone to see though. No, Ibiki had wanted to see just how much damage the man could do with the pool of chakra he had on hand. Ibiki shivered as he recalled the sheer level of destruction Namikaze had unleashed, and that was just in his initial demonstration. The 2-hour spar after lunch had been brutal. Oh, neither man fighting had truly attempted to kill one another, but neither had they held anything back. And while Namikaze had been on the defensive nearly the entire spar, he had managed to turn the tables on Kakashi more than once. Namikaze had then amused Ibiki by acting like a petulant toddler when he'd kicked the younger man off of the training field so that the area could be repaired. He'd also discovered that the man had a snarky sense of humor that Ibiki could appreciate, something that he probably would have noted sooner if he'd spent time observing the young man outside of the Hokage's office. After Namikaze had been inducted into the forces as a chunin, Ibiki had occasionally lamented on the fact that he was stuck behind a desk 80% of the time doing paperwork, as he would have liked to have the time to observe the young man from time to time. Instead, Ibiki had to be content with reading through an endless stack of mission and training reports that were filed on a weekly basis. Some of those reports had been amusing and others had the 26-year-old Jounin shaking his head. The most memorable report had been the one from Namikaze's first mission/survival training exercise that had taken place within Training Ground 44. The Chunin and his Jounin mentor had had the misfortune to cross paths with one of Orochimaru's forgotten experiments. In this case it had been a genetically enhanced bear that had been larger, stronger, and far more aggressive than the normal bears found in the forest. That was on top of dealing with more than a few of the forest's other denizens attacking the pair, such as one of the giant snakes that made their home in the forest. The amusing part had been the fact that Namikaze had accused his mentor of having poor taste when it came to choosing camp locations in his report, while Yamato's report had claimed Namikaze's luck rating had been incorrectly marked on his stat summary. The most horrifying report had been the one where Yamato had made a note stating that Namikaze had negotiated an agreement with Madame Shirjimi, the wife of Hai no Kuni's daimyo, to pair Tora, the woman's demonic cat, with one of his cats. The man had apparently been impressed with the scourge of genin everywhere when he'd been assigned the Retrieve Tora mission to test his ability to track and capture a target. The insane man had even gone so far as to befriend the damn thing. Madame Shirjimi had been so impressed with the flattery that Namikaze had rained on her precious terror that she had even promised the man the pick of the litter once the kittens were born. When Ibiki had seen a photo of Namikaze's pet cats, he'd nearly let out a wail of terror as the damn things looked more like miniature lions than house cats and their eyes glittered with intelligence and malice. The damn dogs the family owned were far worse than the trained Inuzuka hounds, and the rotten mongrels could easily be classified as glorified slippers with feet, they were so small. Both the damn chibi lions and the menacing mutts were foul-tempered and would attack anyone that trespassed on the vacant lot the Namikazes had commandeered for their wagons and horses until they purchased a permanent residence. That didn't even touch upon the incident with Mitarashi Anko just 3 days earlier. I have my work cut out for me, Ibiki bemoaned to his empty office as he glanced up at the time to see that he only had about 5 minutes left until the young man he'd just been analyzing was due to arrive for his first appointment. As if his spoken complaint was some kind of signal, Hijiri Shimon knocked on the door before he ushered an early Namikaze Takashi into his office. Ibiki bit back the curse that was on the tip of his tongue and stated, "Arigato, Hijiri. Please see to it that I am not disturbed over the next hour for anything short of an invasion." "Oheu, Namikaze-san, please have a seat so that we can begin." "Oheu gozaimasu, Marino-san," Takashi greeted in return as he reluctantly took a seat in the chair that was sitting right in front of Ibiki's desk. "I'm going to be blunt, Namikaze, I don't do therapy sessions. My job is to break Konoha's enemies and make them sing like canaries, not put broken shinobi back together just enough so that they can function in polite society. That's usually a Noichi's job, but for some inexplicable reason you seem to have a problem with my subordinate." "I do not have a problem with Yamanaka-san," Takashi countered with a slight frown. "I do, however, have an issue with people that make it a habit of going traipsing through other people's minds." The younger man's jaw tightened and Ibiki saw a hard glint enter the man's emerald orbs as he paused for the briefest of moments. "I've had enough of people tearing through my mind and my memories to last me a lifetime. It's bad enough that I'll eventually have to share my mind with the furball I'm lugging around without having someone ruffle through my worst memories again." "What do you mean eventually? Do you not already share your mind with the bijou you carry?" Ibiki inquired with open curiosity as he'd fully expected the bijou to be influencing, or attempting to influence, its host. "The creature sleeps, for now. Apparently, the process of sealing the furball inside of me took just as much out of the demon as it took as much out of it as it took out of me, and it hadn't exactly been vacationing at a 5-star resort before it ended up where it is now. Minato figures that I'll have at least another 3 to 4 years before the furred menace wakes from its slumber to annoy me unless something disturbs it from its nap sooner." "Interesting. How much influence do you believe the bijou will have over you once it awakens?" "Very little. The creature knows next to nothing about my life since it has been asleep for the past 2 years, and I'd like to think that I'm mature enough to have outgrown the majority of my insecurities. There is also nothing that it could possibly offer me in order to gain my cooperation. I have no need or desire for more power. Any enemies that I might have sought out in order to get revenge are already dead or securely imprisoned, and I am content with my lot in life, if not exactly happy." "Why aren't you happy?" Ibiki asked even as his mind began turning over the slight slip of the tongue that Namikaze had made in reference to the beast that had been sealed inside of him in an effort to determine which bijou the man held based up that tiny little clue. "Why should I be happy? I was forced to drag my Otoko back to the one place he never wanted to see again. I can't say as I blame him either. I know exactly what it's like to be forced to live with people that hate you and aren't afraid to let you know just how worthless and unwanted you are. This blasted village, as a whole, abused my cousin mentally and emotionally, and they damn well tried their hardest to physically harm him. That kind of shit leaves a mark on one's soul. On top of that, I just stood there and let the Hokage turn my little cousin into a child soldier. The only thing that stopped me from interfering was the knowledge that Naruto wished to become a shinobi. Why does it bother you so much that Naruto is a shinobi? No child should be forced to fight the war before they even grow up. And you can dress up your missions however prettily you want to, but you and I both know that each mission is a small battle in the war this entire damn world has been embroiled in since the day the elemental countries were sealed away from the rest of the world. War breaks a person, regardless of their age, but most adults at least have the maturity to cope in the aftermath, while broken children eventually become broken adults that know nothing of life outside of war and therefore can't cope in a world without war. You are speaking from experience, Ibiki stated with certainty. Yes, Takashi grudgingly admitted. And how old were you when you became a child soldier? That's hard to say. It could have been the moment my parents conceived me while they were in the middle of fighting a war. It could have been the moment I was born and the leader of the opposing side decided that I was the one that would bring about his downfall. It could even have been the night the man murdered my parents and attempted to kill me for the first time when I was 15 months old. Or it could have been on my 11th birthday when the society my parents were part of came to collect their precious little scapegoat and properly cowed hero. You are still bitter. This too was a statement. Yes and no, despite the fact that death has dogged my footsteps my entire life, not everything I experienced was terrible. I still resent being set up to play martyr for an entire society that was far too frightened to pull their heads out of the sand to fight the terrorists that their prejudiced society gave birth to though. At the same time, I can't change who I am and I would not be the man I am now if not for that same society and the hardships I faced. If not for my friends and my self-made family, I could have easily turned into the next Dark Lord, and that knowledge used to fuel a good many nightmares when I was younger. And what fuels your nightmares now, Namikaze-san? My mistakes, Marino-san, Takashi replied in a raspy tone that spoke of pain, grief, and regret, and Ibiki wisely decided not to push the man into talking about the demons that haunted his past just yet. The last topic I wish to cover today is the oath of loyalty that you gave to the Hokage. He spoke to me about the short conversation he had with you regarding your reason for changing the wording of the oath, and he asked me to speak to you about what you had revealed of your Kekkai Genkai. Specifically, he wished me to ask you why you chose to use your Kekkai Genkai to make your oath binding instead of just giving a verbal confirmation of your loyalty. I have no true control over that aspect of my Kekkai Genkai, and the only bit that I can control is the type of oath I am giving and the wording of the oaths I swear. What do you mean by type? My Kekkai Genkai does not interpret all spoken words as an oath. There are certain requirements for it to activate. I can make promises without triggering my Kekkai Genkai. However, verbal contracts, sworn oaths, and vows all contain words that will actively pull on my Kekkai Genkai due to the intent behind the words spoken. In the case of the oath that I gave to the Hokage, the moment I pledged my life and loyalty it drew upon my Kekkai Genkai because I was no longer just promising to protect the village. So why didn't you speak to the Hokage about that aspect of the oath before you gave it? I don't particularly trust the Hokage and did not feel comfortable divulging that information before I had given my oath, lest he manipulate me into swearing a far more binding oath that I felt comfortable giving. Yet you felt comfortable enough to give him an oath? Ibiki demanded incredulously. No, not really. However, I trust Minato and Minato trusts the Sandaime. Minato assured me that I would not fall under the direct supervision of the Hokage unless I joined the Anbu Corps, which I have no intention of doing. I also know that I will have only minimal contact with the Hokage until I earn a promotion to Jounin or my family reaches the numbers necessary to re-establish us a proper clan so we can join the village council, and even then I could elect to send Arata in my place. The oath I made was also not ironclad, meaning I can refuse any unreasonable order. What would you consider an unreasonable order? Any order that would intentionally or unintentionally cause harm to my family, and those orders that would potentially create problems for Konoha, since I did swear loyalty to Konoha. And if the Hokage should unintentionally give you an order that you believe will cause your family harm, I would first seek clarification, and if I still find the order unacceptable, I would refuse to carry out said order. I would also explain why I am refusing. If, in the future, any attempt is made to abuse my oath, I can and will rescind my oath and remove my family from the village in order to protect them. Ibiki dismissed the younger man a few minutes later, He'd learned enough from the young man for the moment, and he'd gained a large list of potential subjects that he could broach with the man during future meetings once he'd had a chance to gain a measure of the man's trust. In the meantime, he had some research to do in order to see if he could match up the smallest of clues that the man had let slip in regards to the tailed beast he held at bay. Maybe he could convince Shikaku to figure out the puzzle if he promised to maneuver Namikaze into agreeing to play a round of shugi with the Jounin commander. Translations, Japanese to English. Arigato, thank you. Gaki, brat. Inu, dog. Itoko, cousin. Konoha no Shiroi Kiba, Konoha's white fan. Kopi ninja no Kakashi, Copy ninja Kakashi. Ohei, gozaimasu, good morning. Sharingan no Kakashi, Kakashi of the Sharingan. Team, jerk/bastard, a rude way of saying you. Technique/skills. Kage Bunshin, shadow clones. Karyuden no Jutsu, fire dragon projectile technique, non-canon, created by author and not to be mistaken for the dragon projectile attack with the same name that the Sandaime used in his fight against Orochimaru during the Chunin exam arc. Shinai Jashu, hidden shadow snake hands. That's it for part 5. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.